Today we're talking about life, an abundance of growth. And we're talking about it from the perspective of Matthew and the perspective of Luke. The last time I was here, I talked a little bit about Matthew and how Matthew's gospel came to be. I'd like to talk a little bit about Luke right now, because though many of you know much more about this than I do, having to go through the exercise of recognizing where Luke comes from was very helpful to me. According to German scholar Hans Conzelmann, who was writing in the 1960s, Luke's gospel is divided into three parts. There's the time of Israel, there's the time of Jesus, and then there's the time of the church. What Luke is writing about in the time of Jesus, which is the time we're talking about right now, was a very special time for Luke, a very optimistic time. Because from Luke 4 through Luke 22, there is no devil in the world. There's only Jesus in the world. This is unique in the Gospels. In the Synoptic Gospels, which are the three Gospels that share parts of one another and seem to agree with each other. Those are Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Mark came first because there's parts of Mark in both Matthew and in Luke. And Matthew used Mark and a book known as Q, which is another Gospel source, and another Gospel source that's anonymous known only as M. Luke also used Q, didn't use M for any of his material, but used another source which has been labeled by scholars as L. Is this confusing enough? Good. These Gospels march together, and Luke's authorship of his Gospel can be traced to about 80 AD. So 80 years after the birth of Christ, a lifetime away from Jesus' death and resurrection. And Luke himself indicates that he was not an eyewitness to the events that he's describing. He was not marching around among the disciples at the time that Jesus was alive. He is describing richly and thickly, as Clifford Geertz would say, an environment that he didn't personally experience but has lifted him up, has pulled him out of himself and given him something to truly believe in. He's a possible companion of Paul. So it's possible that Luke, writing his gospel, is walking with and working with one of the actual disciples who was there at the time of the death and resurrection. Luke's also referred to informally as the beloved physician, the good doctor, the one who may have been a physician or an herbalist or in some form or another a curer of people, but who brings that into a scriptural sense rather than a literal sense, or possibly both together. So when we're reading Luke, we're reading a uniquely optimistic person. And we're reading a person who's giving a manual for how to live a life, not a person who's giving a tombstone to try to describe how a life had been lived. When Luke talks about being faithful in a small amount, showing that you can be faithful in a large amount, he's being prescriptive. He's asking people to do that with what they have right now. And the Bible is very confusing when it talks about the unworthy wealth or the stolen wealth, or they're talking about mammon. They're talking about money that belongs to the physical, real world here and not to the scriptural and spiritual world that people are striving for. So when he's denigrating the wealth that he's talking about, what Luke is actually saying is, okay, it's worldly stuff. So use the worldly stuff to demonstrate that you're going to be worthy of the stuff of the kingdom. Show me an example how you deal with what is valuable and treasured here in the world of people, and I will know how to deal with you in the world of God and heaven. So if I can trust you with a little bit, then I can trust you with a lot. But if with just a little bit you prove to be untrustworthy, how can you be trusted with eternal life? It's like the kid who finds a quarter in the street and knows that his friend dropped it. The question is, do you give the quarter back to the friend, or do you just pocket it and know that he's going to have lost it? Because if you're going to behave that way with a small coin, you're going to behave the same way with a much larger pile of loot later.